Thank you for tuning in to Headliner News. This episode, we're going to discuss the presidential debate that was held in Atlanta, Georgia, hosted by CNN. Now, the debate, as most of you know, is between former President Donald Trump and our current President Joe Biden. The debate lasted 90 minutes with really no major highlights. What I thought was stunning in the debate was actually how well CNN actually managed the conversation between the two opponents. With new rules and a mute button, you were able to hear the conversations from both candidates. And I think both sides would have to agree, for the most part, CNN was very fair to both sides. What was stunning last night was there was no real bombastic scene from President Donald Trump. The Trump camp was very well managed in terms of keeping the Trump activities down to a minimum. Another area which I thought was pretty good was the performance by President Joe Biden. I know a lot of people complained Joe looked old last night, but if you take away the unnecessary focus on aesthetics and listen to what he actually said, Joe Biden brought up some really critical points that are actually relevant to where American people are concerned about. Thank you for tuning in to Headliner News. This episode is going to focus on the presidential debate held in Atlanta, Georgia, between former President Donald Trump and our current President Joe Biden. The debate lasted about 90 minutes, with both candidates going over their view of America's future. Overall, nothing new was really learned from the debate, but I did think that the host, CNN, did a really good job. The format they chose, which had the controversial mute button option, actually proved to be a good thing. It allowed both candidates to get their points across without anyone over-talking the other candidate. They also did what I would say is a decent job allowing for fair 1-minute replies and rebuttals after another candidate was able to give a 2-minute response. So let's go into the meat and potatoes of the debate. Most of the debate focused on domestic issues, followed by international issues, America's standing in the world, and then trust and reliability in the election process itself. Now, let's start off with some of the key sort of accusations that Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden made towards each other.
The total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look.
The comments made by candidate Trump goes into an argument that his side and some Democrat critics of President Biden wanted to make or like to make about his age. But President Biden came back. He didn't really address the fact that he's older than Mr. Trump, except to say that Mr. Trump is basically just 3 years younger and incompetent. But what Joe Biden did do, which was interesting, he brought up an alleged statement by former President Trump where he called deceased veterans suckers and losers. This goes back to some of the other criticism that President Trump had when he was candidate Trump, when he allegedly attacked Gold Star families and former veteran and war hero, former veteran Senator John McCain. This is a problem that the Trump campaign has because the argument is being made by the Democrats that he's patriotic on camera only. Now, Trump, to his credit, came back and laid out all the things that he identified that he tried to do with the Department of Veteran Affairs. Full disclosure, got some knowledge about that organization. Now, I would say that the debate got a little bit stronger when it came into their vision for the future. Trump argues that he wants to do more of what he did before, put in more tariffs, more restrictions at the border. He's identifying the border as being unsafe, one of the worst borders in the world, I believe is the quote that he gave. Now, this is a shocking change because a number of Democrats have identified, I think we've talked about this in other episodes, the issue and impact on migration into the United States in major cities, New York, Chicago, to name a few. This has become a crisis for the Biden administration. So much so that the Biden administration did have to reverse some of their rules on the border. Now, where Mr. Biden did get Mr. Trump in the debate is that he acknowledged, yes, we did have some challenges at the border, but when I tried to get legislation passed to address these issues at the border, you told your colleagues in the Senate and the House not to support the bill. This went into the heart of Mr. Biden's key criticism of Mr. Trump, that Mr. Trump is not an American first candidate or will be an American first president, he will be a Donald Trump first president. Mr. Biden argued against Mr. Trump's patriotism and brought up the infamous attack on the Capitol on January 6.
I went to the World War II cemetery, World War I cemetery he refused to go to. He was standing with his four-star general, and he told me, he said, I don't want to go in there because they're a bunch of losers and suckers. My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
This is a challenge for Donald Trump. Overall, I think in the debate, President Trump did a decent job in terms of maintaining his composure. He was also bombastic in his attacks on President Biden, almost giving the feel of a battle rapper hooked on malt liquor and speed. But at the same time, he did do a decent job holding his own in the debate. Where I think the January 6 issue raised a problem for Mr. Trump was that his answer was not sufficient for someone who is going to ask to get a second chance at being the commander-in-chief of our country. Whenever the country is under attack, whether it be a minor rebellion or an obstruction of civil procedure and a sort of quote-unquote peaceful protest, when Capitol Police are attacked and a vice president is threatened to be killed, most people expect the president to provide a robust response, especially when he's just a few blocks down the street. I think that's a critical area where the Trump campaign needs to work on for the next debate. They need to get a better answer for January 6th. They also need to get a better answer for whether or not they will accept the responsibility for the controversy surrounding the election that led to a number of Mr. Trump's legal woes post-office. This even led to a point in the debate where Mr. Trump called out Mr. Biden and his son Hunter, but Mr. Biden did respond by saying that Mr. Trump was the only felon on the stage.
They deleted and destroyed all of the information. They should go to jail for that. If a Republican did that, they'd go to jail.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden, I want to give you a minute.
The only person on this stage is a convicted felon is the man I'm looking at right now.
My retribution is going to be a success. But when he talks about a convicted felon, his son is a convicted felon at a very high level. His son is convicted, going to be convicted probably numerous other times. Should have been convicted before, but his Justice Department let the statute of limitations lapse on the most important things. But he could be a convicted felon as soon as he gets out of office. Joe could be a convicted felon with all of the things that he's done. He's done horrible things. All of the death caused at the border, telling the Ukrainian people that we're going to want $1 billion or you change the prosecutor, otherwise you're not getting $1 billion. If I ever said that, that's quid pro quo, that we're not going to do anything. We're not going to give you $1 billion unless you change your prosecutor, having to do with the son. This man is a criminal. This man, you're lucky. You're lucky. I did nothing wrong. We'd have a system that was rigged and disgusting. I did nothing wrong.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden, you have said, I'm coming right to you, sir. Well, you want to respond? Go ahead. I'll give you a minute to respond.
The idea that I did anything wrong relative to what you're talking about is outrageous. It's simply a lie, number one. Number two, the idea that you have a right to seek retribution against any American just because you're president is wrong. It's simply wrong. No president's ever spoken like that before. No president in our history has spoken like that before. Number three, the crimes that you are still charged with, and think of all the civil penalties you have. How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You have the morals of an alley cat.
Although the Biden team scored some points with going after the perception of Mr. Trump's morals and certainly his legal woes and criminal convictions, the Trump team hit a sensitive area for the Biden campaign when the subject came up about black voters. Trump rehashed his old argument from 2016 and 2020 about how Democrats have done very little for black people and how, in his words, he has been the best president for black people in history and all the gains that blacks made during his tenure. Now, although most blacks may have some issues with that and will challenge the veracity of that statement, no one can deny that you are seeing an uptick in interest of black Americans towards Donald Trump's campaign. And be very clear about this. It's not really an interest in black Americans towards the Republican Party at all, but it is a bit of a move towards some blacks for Donald Trump. This could be a potential problem for President Biden in states like Georgia, Ohio, North Carolina, and possibly Michigan, where the black vote is going to be critical in helping him maintain his seat at the White House. So, what is the true issue? Obviously, we focus on a lot of issues relating to politics in Atlanta. And so as black voters, what decisions should we make? Well, the president goes on to talk about some of the great things that he's done for blacks. He's talked about how he's supported historically black colleges and universities with additional funding. He talks about how he's addressing critical issues like childcare, which disproportionately impacts lower income Americans, i.e. also African Americans. He also talked about some of the benefits he's done with removing student loan debt. I've talked about this before in the program. I've been one of the people who benefited from that. So Joe Biden had a strong rebuttal, I think, in terms of the black issue. I think where the Biden people need to be better at is more empathetic about the failings. And the reason why I would put that more on them than the Trump team is that nobody really expected Trump to be the captain of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this was something that the Biden team really pushed towards African Americans in the 2020 campaign. And so they can't kind of pivot away from the responsibility of raising the expectations of people of color after campaigning off the backdrop of police brutality and the death of George Floyd, and then be somewhat modest in their response to black people being somewhat frustrated. I also think one of the challenges that Joe Biden needs to address in this campaign is he needs to get credible black people to talk to black Americans. For the first time that I can remember, you don't have someone in the Democratic Party that has a strong figure that can actually reach out to black votes in a credible manner and say, this is what the Democratic Party is going to do for you, this is what we've done, and really get a lot of the dissenting blacks to give them one more chance and believe them. I know everybody thinks they're going to go through the same old thing that they do all the time, dust off President Obama and bring him out to black people, bring out Oprah Winfrey and some of the Stacey Abrams and some of the others. But as we've seen in recent elections in Atlanta, bringing out the establishment blacks just doesn't have the same effect. So this is an area where the Biden team definitely needs to improve.
49 seconds left. What do you say to black voters who are disappointed with the progress so far?
I say I don't blame them for being disappointed. Inflation is still hurting them badly. For example, I provided for the idea that any black family, first-time home buyer, should get a $10,000 tax credit to be able to buy their first home so they can get started. I made sure that we're in a situation where all those black families and those black individuals who had to take out student loans that were ballooning, that if they were engaged in nursing, doctor, and anything having to do with volunteerism, if they paid their bills for 10 years on their student debt, all the rest was forgiven after 10 years. Millions have benefited from that. And we're going to do a whole lot more for black families.
Thank you, President Trump.
And he caused the inflation. He's blaming inflation, and he's right, it's been very bad. He caused the inflation, and it's killing black families and Hispanic families and just about everybody. It's killing people. They can't buy groceries anymore. They can't. You look at the cost of food where it's doubled and tripled and quadrupled. They can't live. They're not living anymore.
Although the Biden team has some areas to improve with blacks, Donald Trump still needs to work on focusing his message for independent voters. One critical area where I think that the Trump team made a mistake in the debate was during the conversation about opioids. This was more of a personal topic, which I think it would have been better for the president to talk about the suffering of the former president, talk about the suffering and the emotional impact of the opioid crisis on other Americans, rather than spending all his time criticizing Joe Biden. Because once again, Mr. Biden identified that he tried to get legislation to get more funding for fentanyl tracking devices, which allegedly Mr. Trump told his colleagues not to support. But in his response to the question about opioids, Mr. Trump went on a tangent, which I think actually hurt him. I think in the future debates, he would be better served by directly answering questions. Yes, the base is going to be entertained about his, Joe doesn't know what he's doing. He's old. He's not focused. He's the worst president ever. Every historian says it. That's going to play to the base. But those people are going to vote for President Trump anyway. Where I think President Trump, the area where he lost in the debate, was having a message that was credible for independent voters who are also going to be pivotal in swing states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, and Michigan. And so that's an area of credibility they've got to pick up, because this is not a battle rap. This is a presidential debate. Facts do matter. In terms of the Biden campaign, I would say overall, I don't think it's going to make a difference. And this is going to be controversial to a lot of people. I don't think Joe Biden being old is an issue. Joe Biden is old. That's the reality. And we have to, as Americans, get over this Disney fantasy that the president actually runs the country. That individual presides over the country. They don't physically run the individual departments and provide the services that we use every day as Americans. So I don't think really him being old is the issue. The issue is whether or not he comes across as responsive and can relate and engage his base. You see, Donald Trump and President Biden have an opposite problem. President Biden's problem is his base. His base is not excited about his presidency. Now, you could argue that might be because of his age. He just doesn't have the energy to get people riled up and excited. But I think it's also an issue about who President Biden has surrounded himself with. We've gone from the exciting days of presidential politics where you actually had people from the grassroots who were in the White House making decisions and policies. Now you seem to have a lot of people from the political consultancy class that have never had real jobs, cannot relate with everyday Americans. And I think that is why you see this election so close and the Biden team not performing the way that they should. Let's just be honest. Take away being Democrat and Republican. If you just listen to the broad strokes of what President Biden said he wants to do, most of us would agree with it. Most of us, again, would agree that child care costs are too high, education costs are too high. The Biden team came out with a brilliant announcement a few weeks ago about removing medical debt from people's credit reports, which is going to be amazing. So I think he's got a lot of good things. But what he doesn't have is people who can deliver that message in a credible way to make people actually believe it. And this is where the opportunity comes to Mr. Trump. If Mr. Trump would balance his time of attacking Joe Biden and really start presenting a plan, if possible, on what he would actually do to make things better. Not just say when he was president, everything was great, was perfect. You can ask anybody, everybody said that he was the best thing and everything was wonderful and bigly. The thing that he has to do is start presenting himself now as a credible person who can actually manage the federal government.
Us to be able to negotiate drug prices with the big pharma companies. Well, guess what? We got it down to $35 for insulin instead of $400. No more than $2,000 for every senior, no matter how much prescription they need. You know what that did? That reduced the federal debt by $160 billion over 10 years.
Like so many politicians, this man is just a complainer. He said, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to get rid of this tax, that tax. But he doesn't do anything. All he does is make our country unsafe by allowing millions and millions of people to pour in. Our military doesn't respect him. We look like fools in Afghanistan. We didn't stop Israel. It was such a horrible thing that would have never happened. It should have never happened. Iran was broke. Anybody that did business with Iran, including China, they couldn't do business with the United States. They all passed. Iran was broke. They had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah, for terror, no money whatsoever. Again, Ukraine should have never happened. He talks about all this stuff, but he didn't do it. For 3.5 years, we're living in hell.
Well, there are the closing arguments from both candidates. And again, I think both candidates did a good job in this debate. Although it was not as exciting as maybe people wanted it, and for those people who want to do 3 hours of post-debate coverage and talk about X, Y, and Z that the candidate said, I think the candidates came in with a strategy. Clearly, President Biden wanted to talk about his legacy over the past 3.5 years and why he should be allowed to move forward because of the challenges he inherited from President Trump. And I think President Trump did a decent job identifying some of the challenges currently faced by the Biden administration. Where President Trump will need to improve is, again, being more fact-based, coming out with a clear-cut direction of what he wants to achieve. President Biden, again, has to come out stronger, has to give people a reason to believe, and has to find a way to energize his base. Overall, I was satisfied with what I saw. Let me know. What are your thoughts? Who do you think won the debate and why? That's been our program for this episode. Thank you for watching Headliner News.